Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode. Welcome back to Where They're Planted. Today, we are going to be diving into a vital topic, the delicate balance between supporting our kids and allowing them to hit those metaphorical brick walls. As parents and caregivers and educators, we often find ourselves at this interesting crossroads. Do we step in when our children are struggling and help them navigate the challenge, or do we take a step back and let them figure it out, even if that means that they are facing failure? This is such a tough decision and one that I see all of the time in my work as an occupational therapist, parent coach, and as a parent myself, and the stakes feel really high in the moment. Each of those challenges can help shape independence and resiliency. However, it is really, really hard to know when to let our kids struggle. And so in this episode, we are going to discuss why letting children experience failure is just so essential for their growth and development. We're going to unpack the signs that indicate when your child is ready to tackle a little bit more of a challenge on their own, and explore what giving our kids developmentally appropriate autonomy, even when we see pending distress or failure, means for us as a parent. So whether you're navigating the tricky waters of parenting or you're just simply curious about fostering an autonomy in children's minds, you're in the right place today. And so when I really think about this idea of autonomy and what it means to sort of let our kids fail within a certain level of parameters, the first thing I really think about is development and how development sort of sets children up to move towards a greater level of autonomy. That is our human drive. Our human drive is to be our own person with our own decisions and our own impact on this world. A few episodes back, we did some episodes on PDA, pathological demand avoidance. And that is the topic of PDA, is how do we get autonomy? And, as I've been really thinking about this and thinking about the work with children, both with a PDA profile, but then children developmentally in general, I'm thinking about developmentally, how does this happen? And so what we notice is that starting in, infancy, children don't have a lot of autonomy. Humans are born really, really fragile, right? We are the species that really absolutely cannot live on our own. We don't have a lot of our own internal drive. We are very connected to our caregiver for all of our needs to be met. And then, around the age of 18 months or 2, we start to be able to more effectively move through our environment. And by moving through our environment, we start having choice where we're going to go, whether we're going to stay put, whether we're going to come towards what we're being asked to come towards, whether we're going to move away from something. And so as a parent, when you're really thinking about autonomy and do we step in and help, the first thing I like to look at is developmentally, what is your child really seeking? Are they seeking autonomy over body choice? Are they seeking the ability to disagree with a caregiver? Are they seeking the ability to create an environment that makes sense for them? Through all of these cues. In each step, we can see a child's readiness by how they're able to start problem solving through their requests. So, for an example, young ones, this is our 3 or 4-year-olds. They're in the I want to do it myself stage, right? I want to do it myself. I want to pick out my own clothes by myself. I want to get dressed by myself. I want to pick out what I eat by myself. That is developmentally appropriate. It is becoming incredibly important for that child to have some choice. And I also think it's important when we're looking at the readiness for autonomy, the readiness to step back is if they make a choice that I am not exactly on board with, is there harm? Or is it more of like a social context? Or is it more of a, I know that it's more efficient to do it one way, or I know it's going to work better to do it one way. Is there going to be harm? So an example of this is if a child wants to pick out their own clothes and it is kind of a windy spring day and they pick out a t-shirt and some pants and you're like, oh man, you're going to be cold. It's going to feel cold out, right? This is one of those moments. This is one of those moments of like, oh man, they're seeking autonomy. And do I step in and require something of them? Or do I let this go and let them sort of see what happens, see the outcome of choice and autonomy? So this is a parenting decision. And when we're looking at these moments, and we're going to keep picking them out today, of when do we step back and when do we allow for a little bit of failure? And when do we step in and really create a hard structure around a child? It's probably not going to hurt them to be a little cold when they're outside, right? I might bring a jacket and throw it in the car in case they're like, oh man, I'm really cold. But they're not going to get hurt, right? If it's 40 below and they're wanting to do it in a t-shirt and shorts, that might be different. The other piece of really recognizing when our children are ready to seek independence is their ability to sort of recover past something that's difficult. Now, this one's interesting because when children are young, when things don't go right, it is incredibly distressing. I don't know if any of you have ever sat with a 2-year-old, or maybe you have 2-year-olds who are trying to put their own socks on. And it is excruciating because they are so angry that they can't get their socks on, or they're so angry that they can't open a package, like a cracker package or something like that. And so the distress is so big. That's developmentally appropriate. That's that developmentally appropriate moment of, oh, I really want independence and man, it's not working. I have to make another decision. I need to do something different. And often our 2-year-olds don't immediately do something different, right? They sort of get stuck in it for a little bit. That's a developmentally appropriate emotional response. When we have a 7 or 8 or 9-year-old, developmentally, they're in a place where there's hopefully on board some distress tolerance, right? By this point. So the plan didn't work. I can't figure out my homework. I might throw the paper on the table and I might stomp off to my room for a few minutes. Okay. Again, sit back as a parent and observe. Observe what's happening before responding or reacting. Are they able to come back? Are they able to take a cue of, hey, it looks like you might need some help? Those are our little signs that autonomy and distress tolerance and that readiness is coming on board. So let's just take a minute and talk about the role of failure. Okay, I've kind of alluded to this a little bit, this role of failure, this idea of supporting autonomy, which sometimes means allowing our kids to sort of like, I was just listening to Michelle Obama talking about this, right? Our role as parents is sometimes in a controlled and supported way to let our kids hit the brick wall, figuratively, and bump their heads. It's uncomfortable. It feels kind of yucky, right? And so what is that role of failure? What is the role of failure and what does it do for development? Well, first of all, failure lets you have utter and complete control over your environment. If I decide as an adult that I'm going to not get up and go to work for a week and not tell anybody, I have utter control over doing that. Nobody is going to stop me as an adult, right? I'm also going to have the outcome of not getting up and going to work, which might mean I lose my job or I don't get my paycheck or, any number of natural consequences that happen as an adult. That's what we're teaching our children, is eventually they are going to have utter autonomy over themselves. And so what is that idea of hitting the figurative brick wall? What does it teach kids? Well, what it teaches kids is I have an effect on the world and the world gives me feedback back. The feedback sometimes is something that brings joy, brings accomplishment, brings satisfaction, brings, the completion of what I really wanted, right? I climbed the shelf to get the cookie. And sometimes in my world, I have an effect. And what comes back is sort of like a hard edge, a hard consequence. And what that might be, a natural consequence might be I climb up to get the cookie and I fall off the chair. That's frustrating. That's hard. It might be that I climb up and I get stuck halfway up. So we're teaching our kids what the role of this failure is that you have this effect on the world, and the world will give you something back. People will give you something back. The environment will give you something back. And hopefully what turns on is our own internal sense of knowing gives us something back. That's what we're really turning on for our kids. That's that sense of resiliency. That sense of, oh, that didn't work, but I really, really still want it. It's really important to me and it just didn't work that time. I see so many kids who come in for occupational therapy, often because there's some sensory processing differences, some motor planning and praxis differences underneath, that if something doesn't work the first time, even in play, they're off on to the next thing. And what we really want to see is that inner drive of like, no, I really want to figure out how to get from this point to this point using a trapeze bar. It's important to me. And I want to see that stick with itness of like, oh, that didn't work well. Let me try that different. Let me try that again. It's that resiliency. It's that building that problem solving. We can't have the resiliency and build the problem solving if we've never failed. Right? If every time we try something, we either have it fixed for us, or we move on to the next thing, or we don't really try anything new because we keep ourselves in a very narrow box of what we're willing to do. Again, think kids who really are hyper-focused on electronics, right? That is a very sort of repetitive, predictable, lack of problem-solving experience often. And so the role of letting kids hit this figurative brick wall, the role of really supporting that autonomy starting very early is the ability to sit with distress. It's the ability to back up and problem solve. It's the ability to match what the external world is giving us for feedback with that internal compass of this worked, this didn't, this is right, this isn't, this feels good, this doesn't. The benefits, the regulation benefits, the emotional benefits, the learning benefits of being able to sit with something that didn't go well is far and above the distress that might come from feeling the failure in the first place. And so, if we can really embrace, like, man, we really have to let kids fail a little bit when we're thinking about autonomy. We have to think about what that looks like. And then what our role as a parent is, right? Or a provider or a teacher in this quest for autonomy, and really turning on that internal compass, turning on that internal resiliency for our kids. And so how can parents help? First things first, children process failure. Okay. I feel like the first thing that we have to do as parents and providers and teachers is create the space for children to be able to fail successfully. So what does that mean, to fail successfully? Is the ability to set up scenarios that aren't closed-ended, that don't have a definitive correct answer. When you really look at daily life, most things don't have a definitive closed answer. This is, again, back to some of that PDA work we talked about. Is it the right answer that we have to sit at the table to eat? I don't know. Maybe for your family it is, but let's think about it. Is it the right answer that we have to wear a different colored shirt every day? Maybe, maybe not. Is there a right answer in what order we have to do things in the morning? As adults, we've been around a long time and we know efficiency, we know what works, right? We know how we've always done it. But how can we set up some opportunities for kids to have that little bit of uncomfortable wiggle room? I might think about functionally where kids, a little bit older kids, we want the clothes put away in the right spots in the drawers, that kind of thing. One of the wiggle rooms, at least I know as a parent I gave, is at some point I'm going to stop managing your stuff. I'm going to put some parameters around it because there's also some sense to living in a visually organized environment. But I'm going to stop organizing your stuff and I'm going to stop managing your stuff. And so you know what? If you live out of a basket for your clean clothes and you can't find your favorite pair of shorts, that's hard. That's frustrating, right? So the world is giving you back yeah, shoot, it's too many things to dig through. I might set up the opportunity physically for kids to have a little bit of a distress challenge, I'm not always going to make it easy to, I'm not going to get their bike out and get their helmet next to it and do all of the things for them when they're 9 or 10. I'm going to let them, figure out how to move some stuff out of the way in the garage before we go for a bike ride. It's just these little tiny nuances of how we can set up some space for kids to have that ability to fail towards a little bit. The other thing that I think is important as parents when we're considering how we support kids to fail is what we do, how we hold space when kids fail, right? When kids fail, there's often some distress. There's some emotion. That's normal. It's reasonable. When kids fail, if we're really trying to teach autonomy, it's not what we know is going to work. It's what their experiences and their self-reflective capacity and capabilities are in the moment. So I might not step in and say something like, well, maybe next time you probably shouldn't jump off that ledge, or I told you not to do this, or see, had you just listened, it would have worked. That's not teaching anything other than, oh, I'm not capable of managing my failure myself. I need this external force doing it for me. Instead, what I might consider is, whoa, that jump was way bigger than you thought and you fell harder than you wanted to. I'm so sorry. And then we support, we nurture, we care for. Or, oh, that's not what you expected to have happen. You expected this. Or, oh, that really surprised you. That's really upsetting. It's hard to figure out the right way to do this, buddy. Do you see how I'm giving language that's supporting my child to reflect back in to what worked and what didn't? Again, I talk about this a lot because I'm raising teenagers. I want my teenagers to be able to walk into an uncomfortable situation because that's developmentally appropriate for teenagers and have their internal compass turn on of is this a risk I'm willing to take right now? Or is this not a risk I'm willing to take? And if it is a risk I'm willing to take, do I have 20 problem-solving steps of what to do if it doesn't go as I planned? That's autonomy and resiliency. That's the ability to use previous failure to self-assess. And so in the responses of our support when our kids fail, we can really sort of turn that internal compass in and create also some distress tolerance. In those responses I gave, we're also co-regulating, right? We're co-regulating our kids to be able to manage those big feelings that are coming up when something doesn't go right. Because we don't want adults that when we drop the milk on the floor, scream and yell. I'm sure many of us who are listening have had an adult in our life who does that. That is not somebody who's resilient around problems or somebody who's just had a really, really bad day, right? So we need to give some grace there. Right? We want an adult who spills the milk on the ground and just all right, I need to quick grab a towel. This is annoying, but I have 12 steps I'm going to quick do to make this better. The other strategy that we're really thinking about as parents and providers and teachers when We're sort of thinking about letting our kids sort of go right up to that proverbial brick wall and hit it, is encouraging that problem solving gently and slowly when the child is in a regulated place. That doesn't mean when there's distress that we immediately step in and fix, right? Like if a child is melting down, I'm not going to quickly run in and be like, do you need some water? Do I need to do this? Do I need to do that? Because what that's teaching my child is I can't manage myself. And gosh, my parent is really a little dysregulated too, because like they're trying to make this go away. Emotions don't have to go away. We need to regulate through them. And so encouraging that problem solving, that growth mindset might look like, whoa, you jumped off that ledge and it was really, really scary. I wonder what height is the right height for you to jump from. I'm curious about that, buddy, once there's some regulation on board. Or, oh man, you really, really, really wanted this color. Oh, how are we going to figure this one out for next time? Often even just posing the question without creating a solution is part of the strategy that we have, right? Just offering a wonder goes into those little brains and starts cooking around what I could do. This is the turning on the resiliency, the turning on that problem solving, which is really what we want to think about supporting in our children. So we are going to encourage this problem solving always, right? I don't know, like, what do you think? What do you think is a good idea? Even though I, as the adult, as the parent, already know, quote unquote, the right answer, right? Oh, gosh, you didn't study for your test. Oh, all right. How did it go? Really bad, Mom. Yeah, I bet. What parts didn't you know? I didn't know any of it. Gosh. Oh, what do you think we can do about it now? I don't know. All right. I wonder if there's a way to like write it down so we remember the studying. Is that it? No, that's not it. I just don't want to study. Okay. It's really, really hard. Okay. Is there a place where I could sit with you and help you study? Yeah, I just don't know where to start. Okay. So next time I want you to ask me, hey, Mom, I need you to help sit with me and study, right? All I'm doing is like problem solving. But often in those moments, right, where the kid hits the brick wall, gets it wrong, struggles, we step in with a consequence, or we step in with a lecture or a learning, like you need to do it this way next time. That isn't teaching any of the independent problem solving. And so that ability to sit with and wonder the solutions is part of what develops our problem solving and our autonomy. The other strategy that I do think is really, really important to talk about is celebrating those small wins. Celebrating when, you do notice that the child tried 2 or 3 things to make something happen. Or when something didn't work and you notice the child being able to pause and regulate. Man, that was really frustrating, but I noticed you took a breath and you went to your room for a little bit to cool off. Nicely done. Or I saw that interaction with your friend was so hard. And I saw what you did was you paused and you asked for them to clarify. It's that noticing when you see that internal compass, that sitting with what's right, and then the response of the problem solving. We want to highlight those things because a lot of times kids, all of us, when we're doing something that's kind of working, it kind of works. So we don't really pay attention to it as much. So we want to really highlight that for our kids, even if it's little. Be specific. Be specific about what they did. I noticed that you couldn't put your socks on, so you backed yourself up against the wall so you didn't fall over so you could put your socks on. Be really specific. The last thing I want to talk about within this topic of allowing our kids to fail, creating autonomy, is our own experience as an adult, watching children do this. And what might be getting in the way for us as adults when especially our children fail. I would presume there's a lot of fears that might pop up for you as a parent around oh my gosh, if my kid's going to fail, they're never going to figure this out, right? There's a lot of nevers and always. They're never going to figure this out. They're never going to learn the right way. They're always going to give up after the first try. They're always going to melt down when something is hard. So the fear pops up. The anxiety pops up around failure. And sometimes we jump in and help because of the distress it's causing us. It might not even be that distressing for our kids, but our bodies feel so distressed by this pending failure that we jump in and help. The other thing that sometimes gets in the way is, how was failure responded to when we were children, right? There's deep pieces of this, that if failure wasn't allowed in your family, or if failure was looked down upon, or if, there wasn't the opportunity to explore with safety feeling that moment of distress, that's going to be really foreign in your own body, right? How do you as an adult manage your own failure now, right? Are you able to be like, woo, that was not great. Just had this experience last night. Did something, wasn't great, wasn't something that felt like a failure to me. And there's that internal compass that says like, that's kind of not right. But then the resiliency of like, all right, well, I can honor that didn't work. And then to stay regulated enough to be like, all right, well, here's what I think I'm going to do about this now is important. But that takes a lot of internal work on your own part as the parent, as the adult. And so I think that there is so much power to really sitting with your own experience of failure and those fears about what it means if your child fails. And then maybe break it down. Maybe help realize that, in this one moment here doesn't mean everything. It's just this one moment here, right? If our child is, trying to get the socks on and kind of like melting down, this is just one moment. This doesn't mean that they're going to fail at, college, for example. Like, to be able to start separating that and really supporting our own fears so that our children can have their own experience. It's that self-awareness in parenting. It's that self-awareness that we always, are bringing in to everything we do with our children. It's at least half of the strategy is what we're doing for ourselves in the moment. And so I didn't talk a lot about children's individual profiles in this conversation. And I just do want to say that we are always also considering each child's individual profile, right? Our sensory processing differences, the way that they process information, their, executive function skills, all of the pieces that are in play. But generally, we're really, really thinking about how can we support that autonomy and when are the right moments to let our kids fail. And so I think I'm going to leave it there for today. Thank you so much. Have a great day. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.